Coming up, a special edition of Witness History from the BBC World Service, with women's history as told by the people who were there. We'll hear from the Jewish feminists who demanded to pray as freely as men at one of Judaism's holiest sites.
I am waiting for the day where a young girl's going to be reading the Torah and she'll say to me, "Hey, old lady, that's always been this way."
We'll learn about the fight for transgender women to be accepted in Indonesian society.
It was a recognition of our existence, and from then on, we were rewarded professionally. For example, people wanted a transgender hairstylist.
And we'll hear from the assistant to legendary American painter Georgia O'Keeffe.
It's just this beautiful swirl that looks like calligraphy in brown on this white surface. Until you see the landscape, you don't know that the painting is a landscape painting.
I'm Natasha Fernandez. Stay tuned for Witness History, Women's History Month. You're listening to Witness History, Women's History Month from the BBC World Service. I'm Natasha Fernandez. Over the next hour, we'll be listening to highlights from the BBC's Witness History programme, looking at some triumphs and challenges in the experience of women worldwide. A warning, some of these stories contain depictions of violence that may be upsetting. Let's begin in the summer of 1943, when the first and only professional women's baseball league was launched in the US. It was set up to ensure the sport's survival during World War II, when so many male Major League players were being drafted. Rebecca Kesby reports on this opportunity for the women at the time, featuring an archive interview with Mary Pratt, who began her professional baseball career playing pitcher.
It's the summer of 1943, and American men are being sent off to war. Women are required to take over the jobs they leave behind, on the farms, in the factories, and on the baseball parks.
See what happens, don't you, where there are no gentlemen about? These feminine phenoms play in the All-American Girls Baseball League. Look close, folks. This is not softball, but real Major League type baseball, and managed by former Major League stars.
As many of the male Major League players were drafted into the front line, a new professional women's league was created. It was the brainchild of entrepreneur, Chicago Cubs owner and chewing gum magnate Philip K. Wrigley, partly to keep the ballparks open to the paying public through the war and partly to boost national morale. But for the women involved, it was a great opportunity.
Right away, they saw that I was a lefty.
A left-hander.
I was a wrong arm, that's right.
Mary Pratt was a newly qualified schoolteacher, but had a rare talent. She could throw a ball no one could hit.
I was a pitcher. As a pitcher, you had to have control. In other words, get the ball over the plate. I was fortunate to pitch one no-hitter. That means that no one on the opposite team got a hit. But you don't get a no-hitter unless your team plays behind you.
Growing up as a natural sportswoman posed problems for Mary. There were so few opportunities for competitive girls in 1930s and 40s America.
I seemed to always have such a desire to want to compete. And if I did want to compete, there was no one to compete against except the boys. And when I look back, I'm so delighted and thankful that the boys let me play.
Mary was exactly what the talent scouts were looking for. She gave up her job, left home, and never looked back.
I was put on a night sweeper, and out I went to Chicago. I was met by Mr. Sells, who was Mr. Wrigley's right-hand man, and he put me on another train right into Rockford. And that night, the Rockford Peaches were playing a game, and I went and sat up in the bleachers and found out that I had that night become a Rockford Peach. Oh, I thought it was great. I'll just never forget it.
The women were trained by some of the former superstars of the men's Major League and expected to do their best to play like them, with only a few modifications.
The tying run is now in scoring position. Yes, they play a grand brand of ball. Bats and balls conform to Major League standards, but one concession is the reduction of the distance between bases from 90 to 72 feet. After all, girls run slower than men, except when they're running after men. Strike!
Sports fans wanted to watch a decent match. women who could bat and pitch not unlike a man, but who epitomised American beauty. The promoters of the All-American Girls Baseball League were acutely aware of the importance of image. For the public to truly embrace the idea of professional sportswomen, they would have to conform to a socially acceptable notion of femininity. And there were strict rules for the players, punishable by fine.
Always appear in feminine attire when not actively engaged in practice or playing ball. At no time may a player wear slacks or shorts in public. Boyish bobs are not permissible, and in general, your hair should be well groomed at all times, with longer hair preferable to short haircuts. Lipstick will always be worn.
Along with fitness training and ball skills, the women were sent to charm school. Some excellent ball players were reportedly left out of the league because they weren't deemed charming enough. Too tomboyish or fond of habits like drinking and bad language, thought to be grossly unfeminine in 40s America. They were taught how to dress, manners, even deportment.
They had us all get up and walk, for one thing. It was a little embarrassing to get up and be walking.
How were you supposed to walk?
Not to take these big steps and wave the arms and all that, but to walk like a lady. And there was no question. We were going to look like ladies, act like ladies, no roughhouse. We were young ladies playing in a man's sport. I'm certain that's the reason why we got that kind of a uniform. No shorts, no slacks. We wore those like the tennis dress.
These typically American girls may play ball with masculine magnificence, but off the field they perform with traditional feminine finesse.
Baseball is a pretty tough game, isn't it? It's very physical. You can get quite bad injuries diving about all over the place.
You know, our uniforms were 4 inches above the knee, so you did get strawberries.
Like a big bruise.
But girls were stealing bases and they were sliding. There were some girls who slid all the time, some that didn't. Sometimes you dive and you go head first.
Whether it was the novelty, the short skirts, or as the players hoped, their sporting ability that drew the crowds, the spectators did come, and in their thousands.
We were so accepted by the fans that were coming to the games that it was hard to think that any of them would be critical. They so respected what we were doing.
It wasn't just the sense of achievement that transformed the lives of the players. It was the money.
I was making $27.50 a week teaching school, but I was getting $60 and $70 and $80 those first 3 years playing ball. We were all making good money, and when we were on the road, our expenses were paid. They gave us our meal money. What I did, I used to send my check home to my mother to have her put it in the bank for me.
Did that give you a bit more independence then?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And a lot of the women that are still alive, they do. They make quite a few remarks about how financially they were doing much better. To get $60 and $65 was a great thing. They weren't getting that in the industry. We used to sing, "Oh, we hail from Rockford, Illinois, it's just across the line. We're not too young, we're not too old, in fact, we're in our prime. We hit the ball with might and main and fielding, we are fast. We are the Rockford Ball Club, we always dress in class." Oh, yes, we are, we do that. I look back sometimes and I think I only played the 6 years, but I'll never forget it. Because it emphasized the fact that there's a place for women in baseball. There's a place for women in anything that they want to do. Now that I see things change since girls are getting their chances, they're getting their scholarships, they're adding so much to the concept of sports. Really, they're doing a marvelous job. And I just feel delighted to think that I was just a little part of it. It's so hard to express how wonderful, to this day, I feel about my opportunity to have been able to play. To me, it was a dream come true.
Rebecca Kesby featuring an archive interview with Mary Pratt. Our next story takes place in Israel, where in 1988, a group of Jewish feminists demanded the right to pray as freely as Jewish men at one of Judaism's holiest sites. They called themselves the Women of the Wall. and their focus was equality at the Western Wall in Jerusalem. It is a remnant of the retaining wall of the compound which once contained 2 biblical Jewish temples. Rachel Gilman spoke with Anat Hoffman, one of the organization's founding members.
Listen to the regulation, the 13th regulation of the Law of Holy Places. One cannot perform a religious act contrary to local custom which offends the feelings of others. For many Israeli women, this brought the point home. Who decides what is local custom? Who decides what offends the feelings of others? Who gave them the keys? And it's time to take the keys back.
Anat Hoffman is one of the founding members of Women of the Wall, an organisation made up of every Jewish denomination, including Reform, Conservative and Orthodox Jews. Its focus is one of the holiest sites in Judaism, the Western Wall in Jerusalem.
It's one of Judaism's most sacred sites. It comes with strict Orthodox traditions, worshippers segregated according to sex.
The Western Wall is a site that is important in Islam as well as Judaism. It's the only structure that remains of the supporting wall of the Second Jewish Temple on Temple Mount, an area of East Jerusalem that Israel took control of in 1967.
I have seen only the fighting in Jerusalem, and I've seen quite a lot of that. It's very close. It is pretty widely felt here that the war has virtually been won.
In 1967, when Israel took over East Jerusalem, they built a partition between men and women at the wall. The partition is not equal. Right now, the partition gives 48 meters to men and 12 meters to women. It's not only a difference in size, it's also a difference in practice. Men are encouraged to explore all Jewish expressions in the men's section.
What Anat means by Jewish expressions is the way Jewish men pray at the Western Wall, reading aloud from the Torah, the Jewish holy text, wearing traditional prayer shawls and religious accessories called phylacteries. Though there are many denominations of Jews in Israel, as well as Muslims and Christians, the site has been controlled by Orthodox rabbis since the Six-Day War. Orthodox men and women are segregated at synagogues, and women aren't allowed to read from the Torah. These Orthodox traditions continued at the Western Wall, traditions that Women of the Wall wanted to challenge.
In December of '87, there was the first International Feminist Conference in Jerusalem. It was about the empowerment of Jewish women. And a group of women who came from abroad, headed by, may she rest in peace, Rivka Haut, came with the idea that they will read from the Torah, pray out loud at the women's section of the wall. I was at the lobby of the Hyatt, and here comes Rivka Haut with a strong Brooklyn accent. And she says to me, would I be willing to help her with this challenge that she needs a folding table for the Torah? And that's how I witnessed history in the making. I schlepped the table for these American crazy tourists, starry-eyed and romantic, and I witnessed them being chased out of there with violence and curses.
Inspired by this first attempt, in 1988, Women of the Wall was formally established, and the group had 4 clear aims from the start.
We want to wear our prayer shawl. This is done regularly in the men's side, but in the women's section, it was actually a felony, a criminal act. We want to sing out loud and pray with full voice. We want to read from the Torah, but women were and still not allowed to hold the Torah, read from the Torah, and finally, phylacteries. Phylacteries are bracelets made of leather that have inside them a box, and then the box has a prayer in it.
And what's the significance of the Western Wall to you?
It embodies the image in a very concentrated way, the image of Jerusalem and Israel and Jewish longing to the Holy Land. My grandfather, who came to Israel in 1922, had a bread box, and on the bread box there was a picture of the wall.
From the beginning, the women have been met with jeering and violence by people unhappy at the way they prayed at the wall.
There is a very large group of men who arrive there early in the morning, and they police the place. Somehow, when violence and disruption comes from a religious source, it is excused.
And in 1991, the group decided they needed the help of the Israeli legal system.
We went to the Supreme Court. Frankly, I think it was one of our mistakes. You are bound to wait for the court to make a decision. It would be 14 years later when we will receive a verdict. The court felt that our issue is so complex that it rocks the Jewish world as we know it, and that a government committee should convene and recommend to the court what to do.
But some Jews found the idea of feminist believers difficult to accept at all.
There is such a thing as religious feminists. We are deeply committed to the tradition of Judaism, the texts of Judaism, and our community is completely bound around Judaism. And we are committed feminists. We believe in equality.
Finally, in 2013, the Supreme Court of Israel ruled that the women should be allowed to hold services once a month. However, the rabbi of the wall has ruled that no Torahs are allowed to be brought into the site. So while men can read from the Torahs kept in the men's section, women still don't have access to the holy text. And still the women are subjected to verbal and physical abuse.
What some people allow themselves to say about us and to us is quite shocking when you think that these are religious leaders. Wrap them in their talitot, wrap them in their prayer shawl, and bury them alive. And we're being called Nazis by other Jewish people. I've been the chauffeur more times than I'd like to think of, taking women of the wall to emergency room.
But the group have been gaining momentum. Women of the Wall have even appeared as an essay topic in the national school curriculum, and their members have swelled into the thousands, including a number of men.
Some of these men are those ancient paratroopers that in 1967 fought at the Western Wall. One of them said to me, "We took the wall from the Jordanians, but you ladies are liberating the wall." We won 3 out of our 4 strategic goals. Women can wear a prayer shawl now at the wall. I won't say it's a pleasure, but you can do it. I am waiting for the day where a young girl's going to be reading the Torah, wearing her talit, her prayer shawl, praying out loud and putting on phylacteries, and she'll say to me, "Hey, old lady, that's always been this way."
Rachel Gilman speaking with Anat Hoffman. You're listening to a special edition of Witness History from the BBC World Service, looking back at notable moments in global women's history. I'm Natasha Fernandez. Our next story is about a fight for a different kind of equality. In the 1990s, Sizane Ngubane began the rural women's movement to advocate for one of the most marginal groups in South Africa. It's estimated that across the whole of Africa, between 70 and 85% of all food is grown by women, but less than 2% of the land is owned or even controlled by women. Sizane's movement helps women with farming tips and business ideas, as well as supporting women evicted from their land. Speaking with Rebecca Kesby, Sizane described herself as a troublemaker. And a warning, the following contains depictions of violence.
When we started in 1998, we were not even allowed to speak in a community meeting. Any man would stand up and say, "Hey, you man, we didn't come to listen to you here." It was a taboo, in fact, you speaking in front of the men.
Sizane Ngubane knew from an early age that she was going to break many taboos in her lifetime. Growing up in rural KwaZulu-Natal, she was constantly confronted with how tough life could be for many rural women.
When I was 5-6 years old, our neighbor, every Friday evening and Sunday nights, she would be screaming, and her partner used to beat her up.
How did you feel when you heard that? Did you understand what was going on?
I knew because I could even feel the noise, the boom, boom. Even today, when I close my eyes, I can still hear those screams. And I felt there was something I could do to assist her. But as a 5-year-old, I felt I'm too little. There's nothing I can do about it. But I was just waiting to grow up and be part of the people who are trying to remedy this horrible and traumatic situation. I was born in a very poor community by the name of Imbubu. We used to collect water from running rivers. There was no electricity for energy. We used to search for firewood. And I was the eldest of the 5 siblings.
The family suffered under the apartheid system, which favoured white people and which denied basic rights to anyone of colour. Sizani's mother was a domestic servant, working extremely long hours away from home, looking after other people's children. Her father was a migrant worker, living miles away for most of the year. Both were badly paid, and it put terrible strain on their relationship, a strain that eventually became intolerable for Sizani's father.
When I was 5.5 years old, they were separated. And when I was 12 years old, my father took a decision to commit suicide. And my mom was all by herself trying to raise these 5 kids. And I started being responsible for our household chores when I was only 6 years old.
Sizani would wake at 3 in the morning, just as her mother was leaving for work, and begin collecting the water, making a fire and cooking breakfast for her siblings. She would then walk more than 10 kilometres to get to school before 8. But when her father died, it was more than just an emotional catastrophe. The family lost their land.
It was very traumatic, and the worst part of it is after my father has passed on, his brother evicted my mother from our home, and we had to leave the land, the house, everything was left behind. He just felt that because he's a man, he could inherit. He was just being greedy.
Why was the land so important in terms of helping the family survive?
The access to land is very important for women because in a rural area, it's hard to find food if one does not own a piece of land where she could grow her own food. My mom, she asked me to accompany her to a traditional leader not very far from home, and she explained her situation, that she has been evicted and she desperately needed a piece of land where she could build a home for her 5 kids. When I close my eyes, I still hear the traditional leader saying to Ma, "Oh, Mama Ngubane, I wish your eldest child was your son. I would have given you a piece of land right now. Now I'm disappointed. She's a girl. I can't transfer the land into her hands." What really makes me crazy right now is that I never thought that I'll be 70 years old and it would still be happening.
Eventually, Sizani's mother was able to ask a supportive male cousin to secure some land for her, but in his name. Traditionally, many African cultures view land ownership as a collective responsibility, but colonialism encouraged clan chiefs to assume more control, something they've been reluctant to give up. Since the end of apartheid, South Africa has got one of probably the most gender-equal constitutions in the world. Why is this still happening then?
Yes, we have a constitution and different pieces of legislations, but the problem is that they have not been implemented. It has not worked for women in the rural areas. You could go to any part of KwaZulu-Natal and ask any rural woman if she has experienced democracy. She will tell you no.
It's thought that on the whole continent of Africa, between 70 and 85% of food is grown by women, but less than 2% of land is owned or even controlled by women. When she was 15, Sizani decided to give up school to try to help her mother to cope.
That evening, when I broke the news to her, she broke down and cried. She said, "It's fine, Susan. It doesn't matter how hard it is for me, but I want you to finish school." But I just said, "Ma, I'm sorry, but for now, my main focus is to make sure that you are not overworked and you are not overstressed." I could see that it was too much stress for her.
But what a personal sacrifice for you.
It was a personal sacrifice.
She worked as a domestic servant for years, but was always interested in politics. When South Africa became a democracy, Sizani saw her chance. In 1998, she launched the Rural Women's Movement. With just 4 members, she set about driving thousands of kilometres on barely passable country roads in rural KwaZulu-Natal.
Part of the things that people were passionate about was creating a space for women to share information, to share knowledge, to share skills. Because at that time, a group of women working across the river did not know what the other group of women working in the other side of the river were doing.
Over the years, Sizani's movement grew. It now has more than 50,000 members across the whole country. They share farming tips, business ideas, but perhaps their most important work has been in helping rural women who've been thrown off their land to successfully challenge those decisions in the courts.
Today, as I'm speaking to you now, I'm supposed to be in a celebration where our deputy director was forcibly evicted in 1991, and we only won the battle this week. Today, she's going to be given the keys of her house, which was taken through the barrel of a gun.
But taking on the status quo is controversial, and the movement does have some enemies. Sizani has received many death threats, and her home and several offices have been attacked in the past.
I am frightened by all of this, but somebody has to do it. I'm a troublemaker. There is a saying here in South Africa which says, if you develop a man, you develop an individual. But if you develop a woman, you develop the family, you develop the community, and you develop the nation.
Rebecca Kesby speaking with Sizani Ngubane. I'm Natasha Fernandez. We'll have more fascinating stories as Witness History Women's History Month continues after this short break. Welcome back to this special edition of Witness History from the BBC World Service, reflecting on some remarkable moments in women's history as told by the people who were there. I'm Natasha Fernandez. We go next to the Asian country of Indonesia. In the 1970s and 80s, transgender women fought to be accepted in Indonesian society. Nancy Iskandar is a magician, snake dancer, former sex worker, committed Muslim and long-time campaigner for transgender women's rights. Josephine Castley spoke with her about the movement she helped begin.
Nancy grew up as a boy in Indonesia in the 60s, but as she became a teenager, she started to feel more like a girl.
My father was from the military, and when I was 13 years old, my parents tortured me because of my deviant behaviours that they thought were embarrassing. But my desire to be more feminine didn't die. It only burned brighter.
But Nancy felt completely ostracised from society. She couldn't get a regular job, and people would call her Banshee. It was a slur used to denigrate transgender women.
And how did you feel when people used this term Banshee to describe you?
I was upset, but I could take that so long as it was not a physical attack. If it was just words, I could swallow it.
Once Nancy left school, along with many other transgender women, she turned to sex work.
Saya merasakan di jalanan itu 8 tahun melakukan prostitut ya.
I spent 8 years on the street as a prostitute, but it was fun because us transgender people, we could be free and wear dresses and dress like supermodels.
But her life was hard. She and her friends were frequently rounded up, arrested and beaten up by the police.
Kebetulan ya tadi kita berawal dari
It all started because we felt miserable about our lives, and the government at the time was always coming to the street in Jakarta where we worked, raiding us and arresting us, and there was no solution.
And so they started talking to the municipal government in Jakarta about their situation, and they gained the sympathy of the governor at the time, Ali Sadikin.
Jadi teman-teman itu ya udah kita berembuk.
So we discussed how we could get recognition from society. So we decided to form an organisation. Initially, it was an art organisation.
In the late 60s, they formed the country's first transgender women's organisation, and quickly they started to change things. The government consulted them on coining a new official term for trans women to replace the slur banshee. They came up with waria. It combines the Indonesian words for man and woman and is still used today. The local government and the waria realised they had something in common. The waria wanted to be accepted, to be able to earn a living outside of sex work, and the officials wanted fewer sex workers on the streets. In 1979, the waria persuaded the government to host a night of performances by trans women. The aim was to showcase their talents.
Malaysia itu suatu stage internasional in Jakarta.
It took place in the best concert hall in Jakarta. If an artist can perform there, you know they really made it.
Pertunjukan saat itu 4 jam non-stop review.
There were dancers, acrobats. I was a magician.
Can you just describe what's in this photo that you're showing me?
It's me. And this is me when I was young with my dance partner. You can see I'm carrying a snake. It weighed 44 kilos. I mastered snake dancing and erotic dancing. This was 40 years ago, and here I was wearing skimpy clothes like a bikini, and my body was still sexy then, and you can see my hair is long.
Nancy's usual act included a striptease, but that was too risque for this audience packed full of government officials. The organisers even checked the performers' outfits before they went on stage to make sure they weren't too revealing, although it doesn't seem like they were that strict.
But your gold see-through fringed bikini made the cut for not too revealing.
Kan ini kita ini warna emas kan, bajunya minim.
Because I was wearing gold stockings and my hair was very long, so I could cover my body with my hair.
So before you went on stage, when you were in the changing room backstage and looking in the mirror, were you like, yeah, I look pretty good?
Itu satu keluar, itu satu rasa bangganya. Nih gua nih siapa? Afro.
Yes. When I stepped out, I felt so proud. I felt like, look at me now.
Ya sangat gelap, tapi kita sudah terlihat sih gelap samar-samar ya. Penonton penuh.
It was really dark, but it was a full house. There were about 3,000 to 4,000 people in the audience. There were government officials from different departments, the Department of Religion, the Tourism Department, but from the stage, the audience's faces were just a blur.
Her act included snake dancing, acrobatics, and dangerous magic tricks. She brought a member of the audience up on stage and got them to hold a balloon. She then directed her assistant, who was blindfolded, to shoot the balloon with a rifle.
Macam-macam. Yang tepuk tangan, yang ini, yang sweet.
There was whistling, applause.
The show luckily went off without a hitch.
How were you feeling?
Suatu kebahagiaan. Kebahagiaan yang betul-betul kita bisa
happiness. I really felt that.
And the impact was huge.
Televisi kan hanya TV nasional tok ya, itu diberitakan juga.
There were big photos in the papers. It was covered on TV. It was a recognition of our existence. And from then on, we were rewarded professionally. For example, people wanted a transgender hairstylist. It was marketing for our services. After the show, we were accepted by the wider society.
Even the government started booking trans entertainers for their events. And Nancy says that night affected her personally too.
Ya, lebih ketentuannya saya
I became more confident. My track record was recognised by the government, and I was appointed by their social agency as a coordinator for all the transgender groups in Jakarta. I had a good relationship with the police. And I provided skills training for transgender women, things like hairdressing and bridal makeup. The government funded it to reduce the number of prostitutes. And when they graduated, they were given a package to start their own businesses.
the situation for transgender people in Indonesia has moved backwards since the breakthroughs of the 70s and 80s. In the last 20 years, Indonesian society's become more religiously conservative, and LGBT people today face violence from the police and Islamic extremist groups.
Why have things gone back again?
Ya, kita terjebak di antara politik mereka itu yang betul-betul.
This is politics. We have become a political football. Politicians use discrimination against LGBT people to bolster their popularity with religious groups. Very upsetting. We feel like we're not protected by the law. We feel sidelined. We have to keep fighting. But it's like we're starting from zero again.
Josephine Castley speaking with Nancy Iskandar. In September 2006, groundbreaking legislation came into effect in Brazil, recognizing for the first time different forms of domestic violence. The Maria da Penha law was named after a women's rights activist who was left paraplegic by her abusive husband. Mike Lanchin has been hearing her chilling story, and a warning: the following contains depictions of violence.
Quando eu fui quase assassinada, não existia nem.
When I was almost killed by my husband, there wasn't a single police station I could go to in Brazil specializing in violence against women. At that time, we weren't even aware of this expression, domestic violence. You just had a bad husband.
It's over 40 years since Maria da Penha first met the man who would change her life so dramatically. She was studying to be a biopharmacist in Sao Paulo. Marcos Antonio Heredia Viveros, a school teacher originally from Colombia, was also living there. The two of them met through mutual friends. He was likeable, helpful, and they quickly fell in love. And in 1976, they got married. After Maria finished her studies, the couple moved back to her home city of Fortaleza on Brazil's northeastern coast, and they began a family. But the man she'd fallen in love with soon began to change.
Quando a naturalização dele, saiu por conta.
When his Brazilian citizenship was granted, he showed his true colors. I had no idea of how to make him go back to what he was like before. I didn't know if he would wake up in a good mood or a bad mood. He became violent, hitting the children for no reason.
Maria says that there was no single trigger for the change in his behaviour, and anything, however big or small, would set him off.
A minha filha na época tinha 7, 4.
At the time, my daughters were aged 7, 5, and almost 2. My little one still wasn't walking. One day she was sitting on the floor and she wet herself. Then she got up, and with her little wet hands, she tried to support herself using the wall. She got the wall wet, so he hit her and shouted at her. He really slapped her hard.
A minha filha.
My middle daughter used to suck her thumb, so he tied up her hands so she wouldn't do it anymore. When she managed to untie it, he hit her hard and put her in the shower under cold water.
Things came to a head one terrible night in May of 1983. Maria was at home with her husband and children.
Eu estava dormindo quando eu escutei papoco enorme dentro do quarto.
I was sleeping when I heard a big bang in the room. I tried to move and couldn't. Immediately I thought, Marco has killed me. Our neighbors, who were doctors, came and found me in a terrible state, lying on the bed, on top of the wound. There was a hole in my back, and I was losing a lot of blood into the mattress. The mattress was soaked.
Maria had been shot by her husband, the bullet lodging in her spine. But her husband told the police that he'd been woken up by a noise and had got up and found 4 strangers in the house. After a struggle, he said, they tied him up and then they had shot Maria. The police appeared to believe him, and since Maria was immediately rushed to hospital, her version of events wasn't heard until later. No one was arrested. As in many parts of the world, domestic abuse was and still is common in Brazil. But victims seldom went to the police. In the early 1980s, there were no specialised police units dealing with such cases, and well into the 1990s, the courts in Brazil still accepted that a man who murdered his unfaithful wife could claim a defence of dishonour. After 4 months in hospital, Maria, now paralysed from the waist down, returned to the family home. The police investigations into the shooting were still inconclusive, and even Maria herself was beginning to doubt whether it really could have been her husband who shot her. She had no evidence to back up her suspicions, and the abuse continued.
Quando passou o dia de eu voltar, ele foi me...
The day I came back, he told me as we were still driving home that I wasn't to have any visitors, no neighbors, no friends, no family, without his consent. I was kept under a sort of house arrest. My family would call and I'd make up excuses. I'd tell them I'm too tired so that they wouldn't come to see me, so as to obey his orders.
Eventually, in spite of everything she'd been through and in spite of her husband's attempts to keep her isolated from the outside world, Maria began to look for a way out. Without her husband's knowledge, she tried to get a court order giving her custody of the children so she could flee the house with them. Before she could do that, Viveiros made one more attempt to kill her, this time trying to electrocute her by tampering with the electric shower when she was bathing. Miraculously, she survived and then left for good.
Aí passou 19 anos e 6 meses.
I spent 19 years and 6 months fighting for him to be jailed. And during that time, he was put on trial and found guilty twice. And twice he walked out of the court free because of the appeals.
In 2002, Viveiros was eventually sentenced to 8 years in prison, though he was released after just a year. Meanwhile, Maria was campaigning for changes in the law, and she even took her case to the Organization of American States. Eventually, in August of 2006, Brazil's left-wing president, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, signed the Lei Maria da Penha, the Maria da Penha law.
This is a democratic victory for all women in Brazil. But if it's possible to give it a name, and I think I've already named it, I think this law should be called Maria da Penha.
It came into effect on September the 22nd, 2006. For the first time in Brazil, the law recognised different forms of abuse against women. It increased the punishment for offenders, established special domestic violence courts, and required the authorities to open 24-hour shelters for abused women. It was heralded as landmark legislation on domestic abuse by the United Nations. Maria da Penha still campaigns tirelessly on women's rights, and she travels the country speaking about her own harrowing experience. She believes that the law bearing her name is a great victory, but it's just a first step, she says.
Tanto de mulheres que pensam que a violência
So many women think that violence is only physical. They are not aware of other kinds of violence. They don't understand psychological, moral, sexual violence. The law lists all those kinds of abuses. Nowadays, women are coming forward, but the violence continues. They are coming forward to press charges, but it's only in the cities or the state capitals where there are shelters and specialized police units and all the facilities.
So does she think that the law has changed attitudes in Brazil?
No.
No. Listen, the law is now very well known across Brazil. Many women tell me that they would be dead without the law. But there is still a long way to go. No woman deserves to be suffering like that.
Mike Lanchin speaking with Maria da Penha. Our final story takes us to the wild, dry canyons and deserts of New Mexico in the southern United States. It was the artistic home of Georgia O'Keeffe, one of the world's most influential female artists. In 2014, her painting, Jimson Weed, sold for the highest price ever paid for a work by a woman to date. Georgia O'Keeffe was famous for her vivid oil paintings of flowers, landscapes, and animal skulls. Lucy Burns spoke with her former assistant, Acapita Judy Lopez.
In this untamed land of space lives an American painter, Georgia O'Keeffe. The artist constantly seeks to find the image of this country.
Some of them look very abstract until you see the actual landscape and you get where it comes from. The colors, the lighting.
Always aware and sensitive to things seen, the artist translates her feelings onto canvas. A moment of time is caught, is transformed into a timeless image.
You are so familiar with the landscape that it becomes part of your daily life. But when someone like Miss O'Keeffe, who always seemed to find something new, look at a landscape that you see every morning when you wake up, you see it through different eyes, and it is beautiful.
This is Agapita Judy Lopez. She was born and brought up near Abiquiu, New Mexico, where first her grandfather, then her mother, then Agapita herself went to work for Georgia O'Keeffe.
I came to work for her in 1974. She was 87 years old, and she didn't want to be in her houses by herself. There were several young ladies that she was hiring to work for her. We called ourselves companions.
Georgia O'Keeffe had first visited New Mexico in 1929 and moved there full-time in 1949, inspired by the starkness of the landscape.
She was sort of very aloof. She was very generous and very philanthropic with the community, but she seemed pretty much on her own. She didn't like to be bothered.
Maria Chabot worked with Georgia O'Keeffe in the 1940s. She spoke to the BBC in 1993.
She has set a standard for a woman to get out and get on her own and do her own thing and make her own life, equal with the man that she loved or the woman or whatever.
Georgia O'Keeffe was born in Wisconsin in 1887. She studied art in Chicago and New York and first became famous through her relationship with the much older art dealer and photographer Alfred Stieglitz, who championed her work and also took a series of intimate photographs of the young artist.
Well, Stieglitz, of course, thought she was the white goddess, the pure one, but also the great sexy vamp, as you can tell in his photographs, where he has her leaning up against the doorway and holding her hands up to her breast. He wanted to promote her. And I suppose sex is always the fastest road, isn't it? To get to get somebody known.
Stieglitz's photos show details of O'Keeffe's naked body so close up as to become almost abstract.
It became a burden at once. Became a burden in 1924. She hated it. She was not that type of a woman. She was a very sincere, serious person, sometimes with a sense of humor about it, but most of the time she disliked all of the stuff about her being the sex goddess of the art world or whatever.
She married Stieglitz in 1924.
The burden was more finding herself and not living under the shade of Stieglitz, just like Brancusi once said when he was invited by Rodin to work in his atelier. He said, "Nothing grows in the shade of big trees."
Juan Hamilton, another of O'Keeffe's former assistants. He also spoke to the BBC in 1993.
There were qualities, particularly aesthetic qualities, that they shared that were extremely important. And yet on a practical side, his need to constantly be in conversation and have an audience and her need for privacy and to paint alone were conflicting.
Stieglitz died in 1946, by which time Georgia O'Keeffe was spending most of her time in New Mexico. Her paintings started to focus on flowers and plants, blown up into almost hallucinatory close-up, bordering on abstraction. And the vivid colours and stark lines in the landscape around her became part of her work too. She'd paint her environment over and over again.
She painted this door under all different kinds of conditions. There's a painting with snow coming down. There's with leaves falling. She also did it in red. She's done the black door green. In general, it was the simplicity and the openness of the space.
Her 1963 painting, Winter Road, is based on a highway which ran past her window.
And it's just this beautiful swirl that looks like calligraphy in brown on this white surface. Until you see the landscape, you don't know that the painting is a landscape painting.
She became an iconic figure in the art world, the reclusive painter in the wild landscape, almost a hermit.
There was a cover story on Life magazine in 1968 and had photographs of O'Keeffe walking by herself in the desert with her dogs and a cane, and one had the image that O'Keeffe never even went to the door, that people would bring a jar of yogurt and a little trapdoor would open and be handed through and taken, like very monastic life.
It's a classic story about the two ladies coming to the gate, and Georgia walked out because she was the one there at the moment, and she said, "What is it?" And she would say that in a very firm tone, and they said, "We wanted to see Georgia O'Keeffe." And she said, "Front," and then she turned her back and said, "Back," and walked off.
But Agapita Judy Lopez, known as Pita, knew a less forbidding side of the famous painter.
We talked about art. I learned about the art world, about rights and reproductions. She introduced me to a world I probably would not have known had I not worked with her.
Although sometimes Georgia O'Keeffe overestimated the impact she had on the people around her.
I was an avid reader when I started working with her. And one day, to my surprise, she had visitors over and she introduced me, and as an afterthought, she said, "You know, I taught Pita how to read." And I thought, excuse me? I know how to read.
Georgia O'Keeffe was losing her sight and painted her last unassisted artwork in 1972. But she kept creating work with helpers, including Agapita's brother, Bellarmino.
He's a very patient man, but it was amazing to watch them work. Miss O'Keeffe would instruct him as to what she wanted done or what color she wanted, and he would place her hand where she could do the painting herself.
In Georgia O'Keeffe's later years, she became the object of art world gossip again when she developed a close relationship with her assistant, Juan Hamilton, nearly 60 years her junior.
It's very complex how a person that from the outside might be distasteful to other people, and I certainly was distasteful to many of O'Keeffe's friends and associates, can fulfill something for them. I may not have been the ideal facilitator to other people, but she loved me very much, and I loved her very much. And there's just nothing anybody can do about that.
Georgia O'Keeffe died on the 6th of March 1986 at the age of 98. She's still one of the most influential artists of the 20th century. In 2014, one of her paintings sold for $44 million, the highest price ever paid for a work by a female artist. And her impact on Agapita Judy Lopez has continued.
She was an inspiration. I come from a Hispanic household where women were not as independent as Miss O'Keeffe was. Even at that age, she did what she wanted to do, and she normally got what she wanted.
Lucy Burns speaking with Agapita Judy Lopez. That brings us to the end of this special edition of Witness History from the BBC World Service. Listen again to any of these interviews and more stories of key moments in women's history on our website. Go to bbcworldservice.com/witnesshistory. I'm Natasha Fernandez. Thanks for listening.
This year's Tropical Heatwave Festival promises to be a blast, especially when it features bands such as Skating Polly. Formed in Oklahoma City in 2009, Skating Polly have blazed their way across this great land, releasing 6 albums and playing countless shows to fans of all ages. Skating Polly bring their brand of pop punk to the Cantina stage of the Cuban Club at this year's WMNF Tropical Heatwave, Saturday, May 10th in Ybor City. Tickets are $50 in advance, $60 at the door. Go to WMNF.org for more info and to order tickets.
Attention all urban achievers and nihilists. WMNF is hosting a bowling party rolling with the dudes and dudettes. Join us at Pin Chasers on Armenia Avenue in Tampa on April 6th, starting at 1 p.m. for 2 hours of cyber bowling in the dark. Throw on your best bathrobe or regular streetwear as teams of 5 compete for prizes. This is not NAMM, this is bowling. There are rules, but you don't have to be a professional to come have fun. Sign up as a team for $200 or as an individual dude or dudette for $45. Your entry fee supports independent radio, gives you playtime with your community radio family, and bowling shoes to use. No flip-flops allowed, dude. For more information, go to WMNF.org/events and click on Rolling with the Dudes and Dudettes. The party is now in your hands, dudes.